Vocabulary: amino acids, peptide or polypeptide, enzyme. Proteins are the final class of macromolecules that you need to understand. Let me write that out for you. Proteins. And they are very important for you to know, and they're incredibly valuable for cells and organisms because of all that they do. But in order to understand what a protein, you need to understand what makes proteins. What makes proteins? Well, what makes every other living thing in this world, everything that's in this world? They are atoms. The types of atoms that make up proteins are things like carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen in this case, and sulfur. This is similar to DNA in those 4 atoms, similar to lipids and carbohydrates in those 3 atoms, but all by itself, proteins include a atom known as sulfur, which is found in some of the proteins. Not all of them, but in some of them. And these are the types of atoms that make up proteins that you need to know. Carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, and sulfur. Well, what makes up a protein? The monomers of proteins are called amino acids. They're called acids because of the certain chemical properties that they have. Not that they'll burn you alive or something, but because of the way they do their chemistry. And you can learn more about that by taking a more advanced biochemistry course. They're called amino because they've got certain groups on them. There's an amino side. This is the amino side. It's the name that scientists give to these 3 atoms, the 1, 2, 3, the 2 hydrogens and the nitrogen. That's the amino side. And then there's this side of the atom, which is called the carboxyl side of the atom. There's an amino side and a carboxyl side, and holding them together is that very important atom, which is very important in biochemistry, carbon. It's bonded to a hydrogen, and then it's bonded to an R. What element is R? None that I know on the periodic table, because there is no R element. This R is a shorthand, a little symbol that scientists use to represent anything that carbon could be bonded to. This carbon molecule right here could be bonded to a hydrogen, in which case it would be a certain kind of amino acid. It would be, I believe, that would be, oh well, forget it. I don't want to tell you wrong. It could be anything like hydrogen. It could be a hydroxide. It could be a whole chain of other carbon molecules with other things that they're bonded to. And that is the basic of an amino acid. Amino acids are the monomers of proteins. Amino acids are important. There's 20 plus amino acids found in nature. And amino acids are bonded together to one another to make up the monomers, make up the polymers. In every case of our macromolecules, the monomers make up the polymers. And monomers can be put together, and let me show you how that's done. I'm going to move this. We'll just delete it. We're going to bring in the bonding of the amino acids. What I want you to be aware of here, and I know this is very busy, but here's what we focus on. This is an amino acid. It has an amino side and a carboxyl side. Here's another amino acid. It has an amino side and a carboxyl side. What happens is the carboxyl side of one amino acid and the amino side of another amino acid, the amino side of that amino acid, they'll join together. And what happens is the hydrogen here and the hydrogen and oxygen, when you have 2 H's and an O, they will be given off and water is given off. It's called a dehydration reaction. And what forms between them Sorry, this arrow should be pointing to this location rather, not that middle location. That's called a peptide bond. A peptide bond because it joins together the amino side and the carboxyl side of those amino acid, and it's called a peptide. That peptide bond joins together amino acids. And the reason I'm telling you about peptide bonds is because the monomers of proteins, amino acids, make up peptide chains. Similar to carbon chains or DNA chains, it's just long chains of peptide bonds. Different amino acids joined together, there would be another peptide bond, there'd be another peptide bond. Different groups, and this is a 3D model of it. Here's a peptide bond, which is represented right here in a 3D model. 3D here, and this is a different model, which just shows us the different atoms that are in there. Peptide bonds are joined together. Polymers are made up of peptides. Small chains of amino acids. I'm going to abbreviate amino acids AA from here on just because it's shorter and easier. When you put together a bunch of amino acids, let me erase this because I'm going to delete this. When you put together a bunch of peptides, you get polypeptides. And you should know what the word poly means by now. Polypeptides are a bunch of peptides bonded together through peptide. They're through our peptide bonds, which we saw on the last slide. Review for yourself what peptide bonds are if you need to at this time. And what happens, let me show you a visual representation of what that is this is a polypeptide. Each of these gray dots that you see are amino acids, a single amino acid. They're joined together by peptide bonds. And each of the amino acids, there's 20 different of them, and these are just abbreviations for different amino acids. There's phenylalanine, leucine, serine, and cysteine, I believe. And they are joined together to make long chains. When you take long chains of amino acids and you bond them together, the chains start to fold. Notice how it's all squiggly? They start to fold over on themselves, and it's because of the R groups. Those R groups have special properties, and those R groups cause the long chain to do things like fold and bend and twist and bond together with other chains. And let me show you kind of what that looks like. I'll clear the ink here. We'll delete this one and show you what that looks like. This is a three-dimensional model of a protein. I'm trying to make this bigger for you to see. This is a protein which is doing a job actually. We'll talk about the functions of proteins momentarily. But what happens, what you see here, all these little dots, let me draw the yellow pen, all these little dots represent different atoms within the amino acids and R groups, and all those different dots bond together, and it makes kind of these big blobby looking things. Well, a better view of this, or not this specific protein, we're going to delete this one because I want to show you one that's a little easier to look at. What happens is proteins are made because amino acids join together. Amino acids join together to make peptides. Peptides join together to make polypeptides. I'm going to write that with a P, peptides. Let's abbreviate this peptides here with a P so you know that's what I'm putting there. Polypeptides. And the polypeptides join together to make proteins. Now there's different levels of organization. At the first level there's amino acids joining together to make peptides. At the second level those peptides join together and they fold back on themselves, making polypeptides. On a third level, the polypeptides will start to twist and fold over. They twist, fold, bend over on themselves. And then finally, on a fourth level, polypeptides will bond together with other polypeptides to make a protein. This is a protein. It's a three-dimensional model of a protein. And notice it's got all sorts of bends and folds, and there's things that it's doing inside here, these molecules that are coming close to this protein. Polymers of proteins include things like enzymes. Enzymes are a special class of molecules, of proteins, that act as catalysts. We're going to be learning what catalysts are in a different video, but you should know what an enzyme is. They're proteins that act as catalysts. And there's other proteins which do different things, and let's talk about what proteins do. Proteins are very useful for lots of different things. There's at least 3 or 4 different things that proteins do. First of all, proteins are very useful for controlling the rate or the speed of chemical reactions. That's what a catalyst does. Enzymes, which are proteins, control the rate or the speed of chemical reactions. Rate is a term we use for speed over time. Control the rate of chemical reactions. Another function of proteins is to provide structure within the body and within the cells. Proteins in your body? Muscles. They're full of protein. Proteins in your cells make up cytoskeleton, which provides structure to cells. Proteins can move things. Proteins transport things in your body and in your cells. Proteins can even help fight disease. Proteins are an important, very critically important class of macromolecules because they do lots of different things. And without proteins, you wouldn't have DNA, because proteins also, let me add a fifth one here, proteins help make other macromolecules. There's specific proteins which make things like DNA and RNA, for instance. And proteins do lots of different things in your body. Without them, you have a lot of problems. So let's review. Types of atoms: carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, and sulfur. Monomers are amino acids. Remember, there's over 20 different amino acids found in nature. You join them together in peptide bonds to make polymers, which are polypeptides, which join together to become proteins. And there's at least five different, I should say, functions. Proteins will control the rate of chemical reactions. Proteins will help transport things. Proteins provide structure. Proteins help fight disease. Proteins help build other things. Without proteins, you would not be alive today. This is Aaron Willems. Thank you for watching, and do your best to make a positive difference in somebody's life today.